Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. As you can see here, I got a little different angle going on here. Just trying to get everyone to see what's going on here in the grow space. As you can see to the right, I have most of my blooms cornered off just so that behind me, when people are here and I'm entertaining, it's easy to see the blooms, and it's right there on the first shelf. I have them on the low shelf. As you can see, I have a system of lights, cool, warm, and cool, because I like the blooms to be in that warm light, but it's just a preference. So today we're gonna go ahead and jump into some general care for orchids. However, I wanted to go into specifics and start with my favorite. We're gonna go ahead and start with Paphiopedilums. Now with all orchids, there are four, you can make this five, but there are four factors that you want to include here. And the four are light, water, and your feed, which can be one or two, temperature, and humidity. Now those four things are basically what determines what makes a beginner orchid. So to jump into why Paphiopedilums are beginner orchids is because they're forgiving in at least 3 or 4 of the areas. So like with a lot of orchids, there are two things that almost every orchid, this is like a Bible, religious thing to swear by, almost every orchid does not tolerate, and that is messing with the crown, aka the stem, or messing with the roots, especially with Paphiopedilums. Paphiopedilums, unlike Phalaenopsis, aren't rigid succulent structures. Their leaves are thin, the flowers are fairly thin, so the watering has to be kept up with those special roots with the fur on them. These roots have a special fur that requires a moisture at all times but can't be soaking wet. And of course, as with any orchid, you don't water in the crown. So just moving along, we're gonna start with the first factor, which is light. Now, you may hear that orchids are low light orchids, they can thrive in low light. No, it's not true. Throw it out the window. Orchids do not thrive in low light. They can survive in low light, therefore become a houseplant in low light. No offense to houseplants, but if you want your orchid to thrive and give you those beautiful blooms one after the other, you're gonna need at least a medium light. Now, to separate them in terms of the Paphiopedilums, a lot of people will say the green ones, which have a smooth appearance of an all green leaf, versus the mottled ones, which have a distinct pattern or variegation, if you will, there on the leaves. The difference between them is that the green ones require a more medium to higher light, and the mottled ones will require a lower to medium light. However, if you keep them on the medium to a bit more higher light, almost all your orchids will survive when it pertains to Phalaenopsis and Paphiopedilums, where I'm not talking about super highlight orchids here like Vandas and Cattleyas. Don't really grow too much of those. But staying on topic here, with Paphiopedilums, there's sort of a way to tell if you're not giving it enough light. They'll get extremely leggy and they'll just start reaching for the stars. So they'll start almost climbing out the pots to heights that look very unusual. I don't have that problem here, so I actually don't have an example to show really. Now, if you give a Paphiopedilum way too much light, which I'll get into in a second, but in general, if you give them way too much light, the leaves will, for the most part, go a bit of a pale. Some of them will redden, which a lot of phals do, and a lot of the green leaf ones do. But when you give a orchid too much light, it'll either pale or it'll sort of redden. You have to really know your orchid. There's a special enzyme called anthocyanin that causes the plant to redden, so it's almost like it gets a tan, and it's not a bad thing. It just allows the plant to adapt to a higher light, or the plants will naturally just grow a pale green. The real indication of giving your plant a harmful amount of light is the heat. And you want to, from now and then, fill your plants. As you can see, I grow in LEDs, so I don't have a challenge with heat, even as close as they get to the LED. However, for those of you who grow in windows, this is where it gets, you know, a bit complex and where you want to pay attention. A southern window is always ideal, whether you have to shade a bit with the curtain or put your plants behind bigger plants. A southern window is sort of ideal because southern windows, for the most part, won't provide direct sunlight. Now, with that direct sunlight comes the heat, and that's what I mean. Even a curtain is going to block that heat that's coming through, or another plant, but it's really the heat. So you want to feel your leaves and get a gauge of where you can put them in your house if you're going to play around with putting them in windows and playing with the sunlight. For those of us who grow under LED lights, it's not necessarily a challenge because the LED lights don't really have too much of a high energy output. For the most part, a lot of my plants go, a lot of my blooms, flowers, plants in general go very close to the LED lights, whether they touch them or not, and I really don't have any type of challenge. The key with light is that light is needed to bloom the plant, and because most of our plants are from these tropical, subtropical areas that are very close to the equator, the light is the main key to getting your plant to bloom. Now, 12 hours seems to be the sweet spot for, I would say, almost all orchids. I personally, I do have a special time that I rotate my orchids, the light under which my orchids produce their energy. And during the growth season, I try to ramp up my hours from 12 to 16, and as that cools down, I try to slow it down to 12, but my orchids never get below 12 hours of sunlight. Now, moving along to watering. Just as a general rule of thumb, you want to water a Paphiopedilum as it approaches dryness. So you don't want the pot to dry out. And you want to either water more frequently or water a little more less depending on your seasons. The warm/growth season, which in some previous videos I did discuss, is going to be between, give or take, February and October. You're going to water a little more. And when it's cooler, which again can vary, but generally here in the States is between Halloween and Valentine's Day, October to February, you can scale back a bit on the watering. With Paphiopedilums, you may want to also look into your species, because there are some where you can completely cut out the watering, but that'll be for a specific care. As a rule of thumb, you just never want to let your pot go dry no matter what the season. Now I'm going to go ahead and just touch on the watering for the fertilizing for paths, because it's sort of done in tandem with the watering. So when it's warm, you kind of want to fertilize twice per month, and when it's cool, during that cool down season, one time per month. I use a very, very small dosage on my path. So during, I use a 1/8 to a 1/4 of a teaspoon, and that depends on the pot size. So, you know, under 4 inches, 4 inches and under, I use the 1/8, 4.5 inches and above, I use the 4th recommended dose. And finally, with watering, you just got to make sure you flush. So as much as you're fertilizing your paths during any season, you want to flush with pure water or just with your tap water. Make sure you're running that faucet through the pot to get as much of the salts out as you can. I personally recommend a system of a flush and then a basic water and then a fertilizing. I like to do things in between and never sort of repeat any type of routine, but topic for another time on how I specifically get into it. But generally what you want to know is, as much as you fertilize a Paphiopedilum, you want to flush it. So 2 times a month fertilize, 2 times a month flush. And that's going to be with as a weak water as you can. You can go ahead and get a Brita filter, 0 filter, just run it through the faucet. You know, in this home growing with our hybridized plants and even some of these species, they're so far removed from nature that a lot of times with the water content, it's going to be forgiving unless you're into advanced, advanced care and you're into your pH and things like that. Other than that, run the tap water straight through at a good temperature. Speaking of temperature, that's what we're going to get into next. Personally, I grow all my orchids in what's known as an intermediate to warm temperature, which can be a little complicated for people. So as a general rule of thumb, remember how we were talking about those green leaf Paphiopedilums as well as the mottled. Generally speaking, the green leaf Paphiopedilums will be warmer growing and the mottleds cooler, not cold, just a bit cooler. So generally, for my seasons, when we talk about my grow season, we're talking about maybe, a high in the daytime of 85 to maybe a low of 75, and then at night maybe you get lows of 73 to 68. And then in the cool season, you have your high of 75, which was down from 85 in the grow season, and then you will have lows of 70, which is down from 77 in the grow season. And then at night during our cool season, that's when I have the real temperature drops of 70 and 63. This will indicate a couple of paths to bloom, but really as long as you give them that well-balanced fertilizer and good lighting, that's really all that's gonna persuade or be the indicative factors of your Paphiopedilum to bloom, unlike phals. But I hear change my lights. So these are tips that I hear when I say that you don't really have to worry about other factors. But for me, I do change my lights. So my orchids are very aware that seasons are changing. Now, with regard to how I'm growing and temperature, there are slight microclimates. So, the top shelf is going to be a little warmer than the bottom shelf. There are anomaly nights where my bottom shelf gets as low as 55. Doesn't happen on a long period of time. So the orchids wouldn't be concerned. If you have questions about that, your orchids wouldn't be concerned. I would look into species, especially the Paphiopedilums, because a lot of them enjoy drops that low or even lower, such as the micranthum, which I can't get the bloom because I think I can't get my temperatures too low. And lastly, just leaving you with the last point, which is humidity. Humidity is not really that much of a factor with the plants other than, determining how much you're gonna have to water. So if you're in a dry climate and your pots are drying out super fast, you might want to look into your potting mixes to counteract that low humidity so that your pots aren't drying out by the end of the night. You don't want your middle of the pot completely bone dry on any type of flower by the end of the night, right? So there are things that we can do, such as add humidifiers, which you can see here. I have humidifiers running with my fans. Some people also add humidity trays. I don't necessarily swear by humidity trays, but I use trays to catch my water after I water, so they kind of dub over as a humidity tray on watering days, but the water doesn't stay there for too long unless it's in the cool season, which I don't let water stay down there for too long. But yeah, there are tons of methods. I've even seen people hanging Spanish moss or wet towels. I'm a little concerned about floating pathogens with physical wet items hanging around with fans blowing, but this hobby is a YOLO. You only live once. The orchids only live once. You got to try something to make sure that the orchids are right in your specific environment. Lastly, with the humidity, you can just mist the plants. With misting, I would definitely recommend that you have a fan blowing or fans blowing because you don't want water sitting on your leaves for too long. But yeah, go ahead and mist your plants. I don't recommend misting the flowers at all. They don't need it. Flowers don't take in nutrients. Flowers are for the sexual reproduction of the plant technically, but for our viewing purposes, so we don't want to mess that up. And I'll leave you with that. Lastly, like, subscribe, comment on this video. I'm really trying to get involved in this orchid community and learn how I can help people grow their orchids, and looking for some advice on growing. I've only been doing this for 2 years now. I'm still a rookie. And go ahead and follow me on social media, Instagram and Facebook. My handle is @therightpath, and I'll go ahead and put that up on the screen for you. Have a wonderful day, guys, and we'll see you in the next video.